Hi everyone, my name is Will Fletcher. I work for the ESPC marketing team. I'm just going to do a brief introduction of everyone here. So we've got Claire, who's also in the marketing team with me. Murray Suter, who's in ESPC mortgages, and we've got Laura from ELP, who's our expert solicitor. So today we're just going to be talking. It's going to be an update on the property market. We'll be starting off with an introduction from Claire, who's just going to talk us through kind of the latest stats, and also kind of a look back at the year that was 2020, which obviously is a quite a lot happened in 2020. So yeah, we'll go through that. Then we're going to move on to the pre-submitted questions. So if you had submitted any questions earlier prior to the event, we'll be answering them. And throughout the event, you'll be able to ask questions. So you should have a Q&A box. And if not, then there'll be you can ask questions in the chat as well. But we'll finish up with the live Q&A at the end. So I'm going to pass across to Claire now, who is going to do the introduction and also look at some stats for us.
Oh, thanks, Will. So as we've entered a new year, I thought it would be useful to kind of set the scene by looking back at 2020, which was a very strange year for all of us, and a very different year for the property market as well. So if we cast our minds back to January of last year, which probably seems like an age ago for most of us, it does for me anyway, we actually saw a pretty strong start to the year for the property market. We saw quite a lot of activity quite early on. Selling prices were staying relatively steady year on year. We were seeing more homes coming to market compared to the previous year as well. So we were kind of expecting quite a busy year for the market ahead. And then we got to March, and normally March and the spring period is traditionally a busier time for the market. And obviously last year was very different because that is when the pandemic started to become more widespread, the coronavirus started to become more widespread in the UK. And what started as kind of stay-at-home advice and guidance turned into lockdown restrictions on the 24th of March, which obviously meant we all had to stay at home as much as possible, which obviously significantly affected the market. People not able to sort of move home, go and view properties, things like that, that would not the usual activities associated with the property market. After the lockdown restrictions came in on the 24th of March, a week later, the Scottish Government published some more detailed guidance around moving home during COVID-19. And the sort of main takeaway from that guidance was that they were advising against house moves and related activities such as viewings and things like that, unless they were deemed reasonably necessary. So that obviously quite quickly resulted in a fall in sales volume, but also in the number of homes coming to market. So we saw those volumes fall to much lower than usual for that time of year. But agents did adapt. ESPC agents adapted by offering the likes of virtual viewings and virtual valuations, so they could still help people if they were, if there was still demand to buy and sell. We were seeing that through people looking at the ESPC website, downloading home reports, requesting virtual valuations. So there obviously was still that desire to move, but just when the time was safe, basically. And yeah, our agents adapted in order to still help buyers and sellers get ready. So when things were relaxed enough, they could kind of go ahead and sell or buy a property. But it was probably about mid-May that we really noticed a significant increase in the evidence of sort of demand from buyers and sellers in Scotland. And what happened in mid-May was that the property market restrictions down south in England were relaxed. So I think that gave Scottish buyers and sellers confidence that the same thing would happen up here. So we really started to notice a ramping up in, again, some of the demand indicators that I'd mentioned before, virtual viewing requests, valuation requests, home report downloads, those kind of things all started to increase significantly. And that they continued to increase right up throughout the end of May and June. And then obviously at the end of June, the property market restrictions in Scotland were eased. And that meant that house moves could now go ahead, property viewings could go ahead, in-person valuations could go ahead, provided they could be carried out safely and the correct health and safety guidance was followed. So it's important to note that the processes were not the same as before COVID-19. There were some changes, but generally people seemed comfortable with that. I think obviously things like open viewings were no longer permitted, but agents adapted well, buyers and sellers adapted well, and people were following that. We did see after the restrictions were eased, we saw a surge in activity quite quickly. Obviously, there was that that building demand was starting to play out into the market. So all those people that had been hoping to move during the sort of spring period when they couldn't were now, that sort of busy spring period was pushed into the summer. And then 2 weeks after that, the Scottish Government raised the zero tax LBTT threshold to 250,000. It had been previously set at 145,000. Which meant that people could save themselves a bit of cash if they decided to buy a property before the end of March 2021. They also added a further £50 million into the First Home Fund, which is a scheme to boost the deposits of first-time buyers in Scotland. Both those things were done to stimulate the market. However, as they happened so soon after the after the restrictions were eased, it's difficult to tell the individual impact of each of these things. But generally, there was a surge in activity, and I guess the combination of these things encouraging buyer activity meant that the market became exceptionally busy. And that's also combined with those who maybe hadn't been thinking of selling before lockdown, but then had spent a lot of time in their homes and had realised that it maybe wasn't the right property for them. So they maybe decided it was time to move and find somewhere with a garden or with more space, or potentially could consider a different location now that they could work from home more. So all these kind of factors combined to mean that the market was exceptionally busy throughout the summer and autumn months. I mean, I think Laura and Murray will agree with me that it was, it's very busy for everyone. And probably in around October time, we started to notice a bit of calming in comparison to like the sort of very high levels of activity in July to September. But it's really important to highlight that when I say a bit of calming, it's really just in comparison to those months. Year-on-year activity was still much higher than the previous year. So still much busier than usual throughout October to December. We're still seeing much higher levels of activity. And I think that's indicated by some of the stats in our latest house price report, which covers that the October to 2020 period for Edinburgh, Lothians, Fife and the Borders. We saw prices up 8% year on year, and we also saw property sales volume and the number of homes coming to market both up 40% year on year. So it just kind of emphasises how busy that market still was, even in a sort of traditionally quieter time of year. Obviously, we've entered the new year with lockdown restrictions in place. But a key difference to the last lockdown is, as the current Scottish Government guidance stands, as far as I've checked it today, they are saying that house moves and related activities are still permitted to go ahead. They are one of the essential reasons to leave your property. However, they have said it may be advisable to postpone if possible. And they're still emphasising, obviously, that the health and safety guidance is followed and that a virtual first approach is adopted with regards to property viewings, which has been the case obviously since June when they relaxed things, but they're emphasising that increasingly now as well. So obviously these restrictions could mean that there is a bit of a dampening in market activity for the next little while, but obviously, as I said, demand was still very strong. So even if people postpone we still expect the market to be very busy this year, particularly in combination with the fact that currently the LBTT holiday, as it's known, the sort of zero tax threshold change is due to come to an end at the end of March, and the First Home Fund as well is due. So the reapplications are due to open in the new year for transactions from April onwards. I think, Murray, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I think that's so. So basically, those two things were also likely to encourage buyer activity. So we are expecting it to be a pretty busy start to the year with those kind of different factors involved. But yeah, so that kind of hopefully sets the scene a little bit for what happened last year and the year ahead. So what I'll do is pass back to Will and he can start the Q&A part of the event.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Claire. That was really good. Okay, so yeah, these are the pre-submitted questions that we're moving on to now. These were sent across by you guys earlier when you signed up to the event. So what we're going to do is we'll go through these, and we also do have a live Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, you should have a Q&A box that you can have a look at, and yeah, just pop your questions in there. If you can't find that, there's also the chat box which you can ask in there as well, and we'll answer them after we've done these questions. So I'm actually going to start with, we had 2 questions come in that were for the lettings department. So we don't have lettings on today, but I went to them before. So I'll read out the question and then I'll read out what lettings answer was. So the first question that came in for lettings was, is the Edinburgh rental market still worth investing in? Rents seem to have dropped quite a bit in 2020. Are there changes planned by the Scottish Government when I buy a second home? So Nikki from Lettings came back and said, we have seen rent reduced, but only slightly. And it's worth considering that they are dropping from an all-time high figures of in 2019 and early 2020. There is still strong demand and plenty of people looking to move in and around the city. We have been fortunate that largely the housing market has been able to cope and operate during the pandemic, and we have been able to facilitate house moves properly. It is also worth considering that buying an investment property is a long-term investment, and we predict that the Edinburgh market will remain strong in years to come. So that was the first lettings question. The second one is regarding buy-to-let, what are the anticipated changes to 1, taxation on rental income, and 2, regulatory changes for rental compliance? The answer that Nikki gave was, we're not aware of any anticipated changes to taxation or compliance requirements. However, we do work closely with regulatory bodies, and as soon as any changes are made, we ensure that the up-to-date information is provided on our website and on our social media platforms. So that was the lettings side of things. So now we're going to move across to our experts who have got with us today. So the first question is for Laura. And is there likely going to be an LBTT holiday? Is the LBTT holiday likely to be extended beyond March 31st, 2021?
So that's something I think a lot of people would like to know the answer to. Yeah, it's something we've been thinking about towards the end of last year, because with the threshold due to revert back to 145 or 175 for first-time buyers, obviously we're now starting to think about ensuring that transactions settle before the end of March so that people can benefit from that. As Claire mentioned, it's a measure that was brought in to stimulate the market, to help keep it going through the pressures that we're all feeling from the pandemic. But as Claire also said, the market has been exceptionally busy, so I'm not sure whether it was entirely necessary. And on that basis, I was thinking possibly the government would choose not to extend it, because the market is so busy. However, I happened to be speaking to one of our MSPs recently, and his view is that it's actually relatively likely that it will be extended. Obviously, he wasn't able to confirm anything, but it is certainly being discussed. He thinks it's likely. Who knows? I also happen to see that there's calls for the holiday in England, the stamp duty holiday, to be extended. There's a petition to Parliament for that, and the government so far seems to be resisting it, but we'll see.
It helps if I unmute myself. Okay, the next question is for Murray, and it is, are there any 5% mortgage deals out there at the moment?
Yeah, I think a very pertinent question, but sadly the short answer to that is pretty much no. If you're looking for 100% ownership of the property yourself, there are various schemes that Claire touched on earlier, First Home Fund, LIFT, that are government incentives primarily for first-time buyers, that offers a boost to in terms of an interest-free loan that will go towards the deposit. So if they have a 5% deposit themselves, if you combine this with the government incentive, it then opens up products at maybe 10, 15, 20%. But technically, no, there aren't any that require just a 5% deposit. There is a particular lender that has a product whereby they will lend 100% of the property, but they do require a donor, which could be a parent, auntie, uncle, family member, to actually deposit 10% of the purchase price with them, and that needs to be held for 5 years. So it does still require that 10%, albeit the actual borrower themselves doesn't need to put up the deposit. Now, at the height of the pandemic, the majority of lenders actually withdrew all of their 5% and 10% deposit products. Some even withdrew those that required 15% deposits. The real positive news in the market is over the last few weeks, a number of lenders have come back with 10% deposit products, which is a real step in the right direction for us, and that offers different opportunities for clients. But although I don't doubt that 5% products will come back, I can't see that happening whilst we're still in a pandemic situation. And until that changes, I don't think we'll see 5% deposit products coming back anytime soon, as lenders are erring on the side of caution at the moment.
Perfect, thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is for Laura. When do you see buyer interest moving back from rural to urban homes?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, there has been a significant increase in demand for rural properties. Largely, I expect because people have been spending a lot more time in their own property, possibly realising they need a bit more outside space, particularly as going forward, they may be spending more time in their home generally with home working, etc. So yes, there has been a significant demand for rural properties, also for urban properties with more outside space. It's not necessarily been a move away from urban properties in particular. If there's no outside space with a property, then any outside space that's nearby, so parks, for example, might also be relevant. So I think going forward, certainly with the restrictions still in place, and we're not sure when the end is coming, but also the fact that it does seem likely that employers are going to move towards more home working in the longer term. I think it's likely that the increase in demand for rural properties will remain, but on the other side, I don't think that necessarily is going to affect urban properties too much.
Thank you very much. So the next question, if I can find it here. Yeah. So the next question's for Laura as well. I was going to sell my home in March. Will the new lockdown affect this, and would it be better to sell later on in the year?
So yeah, that's a good question. As Claire mentioned, at the moment, the property market remains open. Viewings, etc., are allowed, obviously with additional precautions in place, and there is very much an emphasis on virtual first. So to look online, most properties will have an online video tour of some kind, and the idea is that viewings are only to take place if someone is seriously interested. But there doesn't seem to be much effect so far on the market activity, which, as Claire said, is very high. It doesn't look as though people are feeling that they need to wait. So demand is high. We're very busy at the moment. I assume there will be some people who are deciding that with things the way they are at the moment, they would rather wait, but doesn't seem to be having a huge impact so far. March generally is a very good time of year to sell. The spring and early summer market usually is the busiest. That's when you're likely to have most buyers out there, and obviously the more buyers there are, the more competition there is, and that leads to higher prices. So generally I would say that March is a good time to sell, and there are no indications at the moment that you would need to hold off and wait till later in the year.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next one is for Murray. Experian has downgraded many people's credit rating due to being put on furlough. This has resulted in a high hike in sales falling through due to declined mortgages. How do you think this will affect the market going forward?
It's a good question, but personally, myself and my colleagues haven't spoken to any clients who've experienced that directly. So in terms of sales falling through from weakened credit scores as a result of people being on furlough, I can't really comment on that as I haven't seen it. What I can say is that lending is certainly stricter than it was prior to coronavirus, as lenders are all adopting a far more cautious approach. And as I touched on earlier, we're really looking at a minimum 10% deposit if you're looking to buy the property without using any sort of government incentives. And I would say that the scoring and criteria for these types of products at the highest lending are certainly as strict as they have been. What that doesn't mean is that it's adversely impacting anybody's credit rating. As I say, it's just that lenders are a bit tighter. I know that if somebody has been taking government grants and these types of things, that could influence how the lender views an application. And also anybody that's taken payment holidays, sadly, as hadn't been explained clearly at the outset, that can have an impact on potential future borrowing. So it may be that what somebody, the person that asked the question is referring to, And yes, that can have an impact, but that would drop off at some point, whereby it would be enough time had elapsed that that wouldn't pose a problem moving forward. Every application, it will be assessed on its own merits. And in terms of credit scoring, a couple of bits of advice that we often give to potential purchasers are those that maybe haven't built up a credit score, not necessarily have a bad credit score, is make sure you're on the voters roll at your current address. And if you have no credit, you've not had any need for any credit cards or loans, it can often be worth taking on a credit card and putting your weekly shop or your petrol or something like that on it, pay it off each month, and that then helps to build up your credit score as well. So if you factor those things in, hopefully it's not going to have an impact, moving forward on the on the market.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the next question is for Laura, I think. If I've already asked this, I'm very sorry. When would be the best time of year to sell a flat? When is the best time to buy a house?
So I touched on this a little bit earlier. Generally speaking, spring and early summer are the best time of year, the best times of year to sell. Market activity does tend to increase slowly from the new year up through the spring and then peak late spring, early summer. So that's a good time. If you are looking to buy and sell, then it can be a good idea to have your property on the market towards the beginning of the peak period, if you like, to leave yourself a bit more time to sell and to find something to buy. Generally speaking, it's better to sell first. That puts you in a much better position for buying. There can also be a bit of a peak in early autumn once everyone's back from summer holidays, hopefully, and the schools have gone back again, hopefully. So yeah, we do tend to see increased activity then, and then it does tend to dip off later in the late autumn and into winter. So yeah, one thing to bear in mind is that that's really looking at it from a choice point of view in terms of when more properties are available and more activity is happening. But the quieter times can actually sometimes be a good time to buy. Because there are fewer buyers around, and therefore you might pick up a better deal from a seller who's looking to sell and doesn't have the competition available to generate the higher prices.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so next one's Laura again. What is the procedure involved in changing a residential property to part commercial use and part residential use?
Yeah, so there would be two elements to this really. One would be the planning side of things. So that's not something I can help with, unfortunately, but yeah, it would be a case of speaking to an architect or a surveyor to help you through the planning side for permission for change of use for part of the property or the whole if you were looking to change all of it. There's also the legal side. So title deeds sometimes will contain a restriction on commercial use if it's been built as a residential property, that it may say you're not allowed to use it for commercial use. So that is something that you can look to change or to have permission. You would need permission from the parties who would be entitled to enforce that restriction. Normally that would be your immediate neighbours or anyone near enough that they would be significantly affected by the change of use. So that would be something to speak to your solicitor about. Sometimes it can be straightforward. More likely it might be quite complex and involve working out who those people are and hopefully getting permission from them.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is for both Murray and Laura. Has Brexit affected the market at all?
Well, from a mortgage perspective, I would say not really. As Claire touched on, at the start of the process here, the average selling price has gone up. The properties to market has increased, so it's been a pretty buoyant market. And certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, other than the couple of months where the market closed at the start of the pandemic, it's been a very buoyant market, and I haven't seen any impacts on the market as such. That said, moving forward, hopefully we get through this pandemic fairly quickly, and then Brexit becomes more of a focus. It's impossible to know. I think there may be a slight impact, but certainly up until now, no. From a mortgage perspective, I haven't seen any impact on the market.
Yeah, I would echo that from my perspective. It's not something that has really had any significant impact that we can tell. It's a question that's been asked for a while now. We've not really noticed anything. It's difficult to tell what's the pandemic and what's Brexit at the moment. As the pandemic hopefully comes to an end, then we may see some impacts from Brexit. If there are wider economic consequences of Brexit in terms of a slowing in the economy, then that is likely to have some impact on the property market, but nothing so far that we can see.
Cool. Thank you both. That's really good. So the last question from the pre-submitted questions is from Murray. And if you are wanting to ask any questions, you've got the Q&A box there, which you can put them into. So the last question is, I've lived outside of Scotland since 2007, but I'm coming back. Will I be entitled to any government schemes for house buying? I think talking about the First Home Fund or the other schemes that are out there.
Yeah. Okay, a very good question, and something we actually speak to clients with on a fairly regular basis. I think there's really two parts to the answer. First and foremost, if you meet the criteria for these schemes, which is usually, are you a first-time buyer? Are you buying in Scotland? I know that's perhaps slightly simplified, but if you meet those criteria, then there's absolutely no reason why somebody just moving back after a significant absence can apply for these schemes, and it would just be a case of applying as any other potential borrower would. Now, what I think might influence not just the schemes, but actually a mortgage application itself, is having a track record back in Scotland. Now, I don't know where this person may have been. It could be that they've kept up a track record of bank statements, these types of things. So if a lender tries to find you, then they can. Some people I know stay registered at parents' addresses, for example, and bank statements keep going there. So if you have that track record maintained, then there is a chance that we'd be able to move ahead, pretty quickly with that. If the track record needs to be built up, it may just mean, bank statements, paying rent or bills, these types of things. And some lenders may need 3 to 6 months of a track record before they would consider an application. But in short, would they be entitled to use these schemes? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the end of the pre-submitted questions. We've had a few questions come in. I don't want to throw any curveballs at you. There may be some that we can't answer straight away, but we'll do our best. And if we can't answer them now, if you just ping the email, the marketing@espc.com, ping us an email, we can answer that question there. So the first one is from Jeff. We have sold and moved out to stay with family whilst looking for our new, more rural property. How much of a benefit is this likely to be when we come to buy, and how should we capitalize on this? So I think this is talking about taking time basically to find the right property. Yeah,
so I would say that having sold already and not now having a property to sell will make a huge difference in terms of making you a much more attractive buyer to sellers. So yeah, I would say that would make a huge difference. In terms of how to capitalize on it, it's really a case of making your position known to sellers at the point of noting interest and offering, because if you are competing against other buyers who may have a property to sell, then that would make you stand out from them.
That's fine. Okay. There's actually one I missed at the start. Claire, you might be able to answer this one. What percentage of asking price are you seeing across Edinburgh? Over asking price are you seeing across Edinburgh?
I don't have the over asking price to hand, but I do know that in terms of the average percentage over home report valuation, so for the last quarter of 2020, it was across Edinburgh. I think in Edinburgh specifically, it was 4% over the home report valuation was the average, and that's across all properties in Edinburgh. It's important to remember that, because it's always worth bearing in mind that certain properties in certain areas you might actually have to bid a bit more, others might come closer to the valuation. So we can give an average of, I think, the average was about 4% over the valuation. But in these cases, it's always, if you are wanting to know for a specific area or something, it's worth probably getting in touch with a solicitor, because they can give you some more insight. They have access to the ESPC sales data and stuff as well, so they can give you more insight into specific properties in different areas as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Claire, from my experience and the clients obviously that I dealt with last year, it's not necessarily a case that there's a fixed percentage that they have to go above. There's a lot of other factors like the seller circumstances, but I certainly had clients that got properties more towards the end of the year at value, and even obviously it was far rarer, but some clients actually paid a little bit less than the home report value. So there's a lot of factors to take into account, and yeah, as you said, it's absolutely worth speaking to a solicitor and get their view on it. So.
Yeah, as a solicitor, I would say that that's interesting, Claire. Actually, it's slightly lower than I would have thought. There's still plenty of closing dates happening and properties selling for significantly over home report valuation. For a competitive closing date, we were using a rough rule of thumb of between 5 and 10%. I suppose the 4% will allow for the ones that aren't achieving that. So that is still very much the case. I've got plenty of closing dates this week. So yeah.
It all sounds good. Okay, just making sure I'm not on mute. Okay, there's another question came in. I've seen on Bank of Scotland analysis that there's a significant decrease in Livingston house prices recently. Do you have any good insights on this? And if this is due to continue, might it be a good place to invest? Like we said earlier, it's really be worth speaking to a solicitor about this, because they can actually, or even the ESPC, we can go into our insights and give you precise data, which is really important, because saying even in areas as big as Livingston, there may be some areas within Livingston that are performing really, really well, and there may be some areas within Livingston that are not performing well. And if you want to invest, it may be a good place to do it there. So it's you have to be a bit more granular when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's worth bearing that in mind with average. We use a lot of average prices and stuff in our home report. House price report, sorry. But yeah, it's always worth being aware that there can be many different factors that affect averages. There can be many different property types. Sometimes it's based on just the proportion of different property types that have made up the sales for that period of time as well. So it's just worth always being aware. But yeah, definitely speaking to a solicitor who's experienced in that area and can advise you more is probably the best thing to do.
Perfect, thank you. So this question here: will the pandemic / Brexit affect the amount of cash valuation required for properties in Edinburgh, specifically one beds in the city centre? Will more or less cash overvaluation be required overall? I think that's kind of asking, if we zero in on the one bed aspect, Claire, I think we confirm that they've been moving slower than other properties in the city centre.
Again, it definitely depends. I think anecdotally, as Murray was saying, there have been some people that have maybe gotten sort of properties closer to kind of the valuation and stuff and have, been able to do that. But then, as Laura said, there also are properties going to closing dates and things like that. So it's difficult to say, blanket like, oh yeah, you can get this at this level. I think there was maybe in the winter, maybe the first home fund was paused back in October. It maybe meant that there was slightly less competition for some of those sort of more typical starter homes. But you were still seeing some that were selling well and selling well above their valuation. So it does depend. So I think with a lot of these things, there's not really a magic number to say this is the amount you definitely need to bid over. But I think that's where you can really use the expertise of a solicitor to kind of advise you on that. I think I would, if Laura and Murray would agree with that, I guess, if you guys have anything else to add.
Yeah, I would just say that the amount that you're likely to have to pay over valuation will depend largely on the type of property, the amount of competition there is, and the wider economic circumstances. If the pandemic and Brexit result in economic slowdown and the property market slowing down, then that should result in the amount over valuation needed coming down, and possibly even you'll be able to get a property at value or under. Whereas if we continue to see market activity holding, then it's likely to stay fairly similar to the way it is just now.
Cool. Okay, so next question has come in. If you are in a position where you have to sell your house due to a personal situation and it really needs a bit of work done on it, but you cannot afford to get the work done, how should you best proceed?
I'll take that one. So yeah, if ideally would do some work to a property to make it look nicer, etc., for going on the market, but you can't afford to do that, then you just have to go ahead with it the way it is. And I mean, there's certain things you can do to make it look better without spending money on it, making best use of the space, clearing away your clutter, all the usual kind of advice for going on the market. And in an active market like this, I'm not sure it's going to make a huge difference. I mean, also the advice sometimes is that you could spend a lot of money on more expensive things like kitchens and bathrooms and things, and ultimately they might not suit the eventual buyer. So yeah, if it's something you have to do, then just go ahead, and in the current market anyway, I don't think you would have too much difficulty selling.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've answered that one. Regarding the Edinburgh buying and selling market specifically, what are your predictions for house prices in 2021? And what is the average price above home report value, which we've said is 4%. So this is probably a crystal ball moment, which I think we'd all love to know. But Laura, if you've asked Claire as well, I don't know if you've got any notions or ideas that you think it may be going?
Sure, yeah. Certainly, as I've said, at the moment the activity is holding and prices are continuing to do reasonably well. I'm not sure we're going to see as much in terms of very high premiums above home report valuation as we had last year and the year before. It is really hard to say. With the furlough scheme due to end in April, that may result in a slowing, then it may be extended. Who knows? I'm not sure I would expect a significant drop, maybe something of a drop, but equally it is possible that if the economy holds, we'll keep going the way we are just now.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got another specific one about an area, which is West Lothian. What is the market like on the outskirts of Edinburgh? We live literally 500 yards outside of the city in West Lothian and are wanting to sell our house hopefully this year. Again, I would maybe advise speaking to a solicitor, getting a valuation, and also asking about how our properties in your area are selling, because it could be a neighborhood across are selling slower than yours or fast. You know, there's a lot of factors there. Laura, would you want to add anything to that? Or
yeah, no, I would echo that. I would say that as far as I'm aware, generally the outskirts of Edinburgh are performing quite well, particularly because, as we touched on earlier, with there being more demand for outside space, you generally can get that as you move towards the outskirts. So yeah, without knowing the specific area, I would imagine that it's performing relatively well, but as Will and Claire have said, it is very specific to certain areas, neighbourhoods, types of property.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we've got 2 more questions left. This one, I don't know if you guys will know it, so don't worry if you don't. I've heard that there may be financial changes coming from the Scottish Government regarding the buying of second homes. Do you know anything about this? I do not, but I don't know if anyone else has heard anything or if this is currently hearsay.
Not specifically, no.
Okay, cool. No, nice and easy. Okay, and last question. This is for Murray. If I am in a position to pay back the Scottish Government first-time buyer equity loan in full, should I do this sooner rather than later?
There's no real right or wrong answer to that. Obviously, I would always suggest it's better to own the property, outright, but it is an interest-free loan. It may be worth tying it in with when you come to remortgage the current deal that you have on the property if you're not planning to sell it. Because I think, quite often people will repay that when they sell the property, but fantastic if you're in the position to do that before you sell it. As I say, it may be worth looking to do that when you come to remortgage, because then it would open up a wider range of potential lenders, because not every lender gets involved in the shared equity schemes, such as the ones that the government offer. So, if they're in a position with their current mortgage where they're able to do it just now, then absolutely that's something we could look at. But we would, if I was speaking to somebody about that, I would look at the implications of both options, looking to do that now, and how will that impact your mortgage just now, and how would it impact things if you waited until the end of the current deal, because you could transfer to a new product literally the day after your current deal finishes with a lender that when there's no shared equity involved. As I say, it just opens up a wider market for you. So that's certainly what I would look at. I would say there's no hard and fast answer to that. Everybody's circumstances will be marginally different. So, I would look to assess that and see which of those two options were better for that particular person.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. We've had one more question come in, just asking if the session will be available afterwards, and it is. We're recording this. We'll be putting it on our YouTube, and we'll also be putting it on Facebook and our LinkedIn's as well, so you can see there from the start if there's anything you missed, or if you want to re-listen to something, go back over our answers, anything there. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panelists, Claire, Laura, and Murray. That was really, really good. You guys were fantastic. I think we've lots of really good information today. This has obviously been a more broad session, so we will be doing other sessions focused on buy-to-let market and also first-time buyers. And we're also going to be doing some local sessions. So we're going to do Fife, Dumfries and Galloway, for example. We'll be doing them later on in the year. And we'll be keeping these online for now, obviously, because there is no face-to-face meetings, as it should be. And also I'd like to thank all of the people who came along today. I had a really strong attendance and some really good questions. So thank you very much for that. And I'll just say goodbye to everyone now. Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks.